All right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last in our 2024-2025 webinar series. Today is the big wrap-up webinar about releasing your anthology and kind of looking at the more technical side of it. Janelle spoke on the editorial side a couple of weeks ago. Now we'll get into kind of the nitty-gritty of what happens in your encoding. Before we begin, if you don't know me, I'm Navarra. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the project manager for LEMDO. I've also been the person that kind of is supporting all of the anthologies with their release processes, getting all of their checklists and organizations in place. And I do a lot of those pre-release checks that Janelle mentioned last time. We all look at encoding of all of your files before they get released. I'm one of the people that does that. Fun fact about me, I really enjoy hiking. I've been getting back into it recently and always like to be on the move, going out and doing things. If that's you as well, and you like to be moving around during webinars, please feel free, fidget, doodle, take notes, knit, move around, whatever it is you need to do. No worries about that. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Kosapsan peoples on whose territory the university stands, and the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. I, as I said, have been out hiking lots recently. This is a picture I took last weekend. A beautiful Gary Oak ecosystem with the camisole in bloom here. It's been very beautiful in our area lately, for sure. Okay, so we have a few learning objectives today. And all of what we talk about is going to kind of be condensed into these. But you're going to get a lot of information. Hopefully that is kind of manageable and paced reasonably. But the things that you're going to get out of today are you're going to understand the phases of anthology release. You're going to know what your job is, especially anthology leads. You're going to know what your job is during each phase of release and what LEMDO's job is during each phase. You're also going to become familiar with your anthology directory in Oxygen. If you're not familiar with that already, it's a good thing to know what's going on in there. And you're going to understand that there are encoding standards that we must meet before we publish. So let's talk basics first. What are the phases of release? Well, they are these. We start off, we're encoding. That's the thing that lots of people are doing all the time. That's what editors are working on. They're editing their stuff. LEMDO is encoding, editors are encoding, RAs are encoding. That's our general work. When the anthology leads say, hey, I think we've done all of our editorial and encoding work for now. Let's get ready to release. We move into this phase called pre-freeze. And this is where we're doing a lot of those checks, making sure the encoding's happy, making sure the editing is happy, everything's good to move towards publication. Once all those checks have been gone through, we move into freeze, and then finally we release your anthology, whatever version that is. And then once that version is released, you move back into your encoding and editing for your next release. Unless, of course, you are done. You've got, only one release your anthology ever needs to do, or only two releases. You finish those two, then you're done. So when we look at these phases, encoding, this is what we've talked about all year in our webinar series. All of your content gets added during this phase. All of your content gets encoded during this phase. And as anthology leads, you're going to decide what is included in this release of your anthology. During the pre-freeze phase, this is when LEMDO is checking encoding. This is when we make a pre-freeze checklist. So everything that needs to be done before release, we put that in a list and make sure it gets done. This is when we do any of the final encoding fixes. So if we check your encoding and say, oh, there's an issue here, that gets dealt with. This is also when the anthology leads and editors will do some proofing, and we do metadata updates and checks. Once all of that's been done, we're all happy. We move into freeze. And what I mean by freeze is the period before anthology release, during which no new content should be added to the files that you will publish and no major revisions should be made. So this is the point where you don't add a new file, you don't go in and make new editorial decisions. It's just, getting through those final little bits. During this phase, we make a freeze checklist. So all of those, checking links, everything that gets put onto a list as well. We check all of the links. We make sure that the Hamburger menus have something in them. And we check for any glaring errors. So those little mistakes that make it look, less scholarly, those we can fix. And this is also when we change your status and say, this file is published. Once we've done all of that, we say to our developer, Martin Holmes, hey, Martin, I think this anthology is ready to release. And Martin says, yes, I agree. And then we publish a static site for you. So that's the cycle that your anthology release goes through. It goes encoding all the way to release. Once you're done that, you head back to encoding and you do it all again. And hopefully it gets a little bit easier every time. Because, your first release, you're going to have a lot more things that you need to do. You're going to have, your style and design that needs to get polished up if there's anything missing. All of your about pages need to be published for the first time. Subsequent releases are a little bit less intense because you're just adding additions typically. So that's our basics. Let's get into a bit of the nitty-gritty, what happens. So encoding, again, we've been talking about this all year, but I'm going to talk a bit for the anthology leads about what are the things that need to happen before we get to that pre-freeze. So the first is you need to be familiar with your anthology directory and add the things to it that need to be added. So about pages, site files, and more. The about folders, they're going to be anthology specific, and I'll share my screen in a second so that we can go through one. But in your anthology directory, so in your DRE directory, your QME directory, DUE directory, you're going to have some folders that contain your about pages. It might just be one folder called about. It might be many folders. That's kind of your thing to figure out how you need to do organization. But they're all anthology specific. They contain all of your files that are about your site. They contain an anthology bibliography, a static search, and user guide, and release notes. And this is who's responsible for those things. You're about your site, you need to write because you're the person who knows that. Anthology bibliography, same thing. Anthology leads should be compiling that. Static search, LEMDO team will add in. User guide, we work together. So Janelle and I have a user guide for LEMDO sites in general. You can customize it a bit to match any customizations that your anthology has made. Release notes, likewise, Janelle and anthology leads work together on those. After your about folders, you're going to have a site folder. This contains your CSS, your anthology level styling. It contains your favicon, which, if you're not familiar with that little word, it's the tiny little image when you have your browser, the tab at the top, the tiny image on there, that's your favicon. You have a fonts folder, which has extra fonts if required. That's not necessary. You have an images folder, which contain your anthology images, not your edition images, just the anthology ones. A JavaScript folder, which can contain anthology JavaScript, although it's usually empty. and then something called template. The template folder contains your HTML template. Um, we'll also look at an example of that. That's the scaffolding for your website, what it kind of is arranged like. And here's the responsibility for that. CSS, Anthology leads, and if you have a, Anthology developer, you can add your CSS. Favicon, fonts, images, you can do all of those. JavaScript, you can do all of those. And then the template, we work together on. Of course, I put this here. LEMDO team is here to help you with all of it. Ask when you have questions, and we discuss it, we figure it out together. But ideally, when you're wanting to add these things, you're the one who is adding them. So that's your directory, and I'm going to share my oxygen screen for a second. Unfortunately, I can't make the text much bigger on the side here.
Navarra,
Yeah.
there was a comment from James in the chat that some of us don't know what these things mean about your last slide.
Oh,
Could
yeah.
you go back and just give a quick summary of what those acronyms mean?
Yeah, for sure. Let me make this big again. So CSS, that is cascading style sheets. This is your website colors. If you're changing the fonts at all, that's where this gets done. It's the appearance of your site. Um, that oh, we're planning on giving some more Anthology lead specific information about this, or webinars or something later this year. Um, but CSS, typically that's going to be your website colors. The favicon, as I said, is that little image on your browser tab. Fonts is font, what type is used on your website. Again, that's often not required. JavaScript, that's kind of the interactions that are possible on your website. Um, Typically, LEMDO has taken care of all of the interactions that you need. So, your little tools to add annotations, I think those are done with JavaScript. How the menus slide in and out is done with the JavaScript. Um, and again, like typically, you're not going to need to add anything there. Um, I think we have a couple of anthologies who've decided they need a couple of extra tools um, for their website uh, to kind of, make it a little bit more specific to what they want for their anthology. They can do that in there. Um, but typically what you know, bare bones are going to want is a color, like a branding color for your website, little image for the top, any images for your site, like when you go to your home page, you might have the image right on the front that gets put in images. And then HTML, that's just another markup language. Um, it's what gets put on the internet. Um, yeah, hopefully that helps explain. Janelle's put a very nice thing in the chat. Um, Cascading style sheets. This is how you make your web page look nice. JavaScript makes things happen like pop-ups. And some people say that HTML is the builder, CSS is the artist, and JavaScript is the magician. Okay, hopefully that helps answer the question there. Perfect.
Thanks, Navarra.
Okay, so I'm going to just show you the directory really quickly here. So here we have LEMDO um, in Oxygen in our project view. Um, in there, as always, we have data, and inside of data, we have a folder called Anthologies. This is where the anthology directories live, and we have a few of them. When you're an anthology lead, you're working on your anthology pages, this is where you go. You find your anthology. So if we look at the QME one here, it has a few folders. It has About, Context, Performance Editions, Production Records, Resources, and Site. Moms also has quite a few credits, documents, editions. I think we have NISC has just About and Site. And so again, they're anthology specific what exactly gets put in there. All of the ones that aren't Site are going to contain your About pages. They're going to have your static search XML page. They're going to have your, this is the history of our anthology page, your release notes, your user guide. Those live in the About folders. Then you have your Site folder, and this contains, again, your CSS. So here we have that styling, qme.scss. This contains, I won't look at it in here. It contains all of your styling, which in most cases is pretty much just colors. We have the fav icon, and it has a few different options depending on what browser and device you're using. We have some fonts. Here are all of the images that QME uses in its About pages. They have some logos. They have a picture of a queen for their logo, things like that under images. JavaScript, which I believe has, yep, an empty file with a comment in it, because typically you don't need to add JavaScript. And then they have the template with the site page. Outside of the folders, you have a few things, some more static search, and then qme.xml. We're also going to talk more about this qme.xml, or whatever your anthology is, .xml. That's one of the things that kind of builds up your website. It gives you your homepage, it gives you metadata for the site. We'll deep dive into that in just a second. And here comes that second right here. So we're going to talk about including files. This is how you add additions to your anthology. So you've decided, oh, I want to include a Humorous Day's Mirth in my next release. How do you add that to your anthology? It happens in your .xml file, which, as I said, gives metadata for the entire anthology. It has content and metadata for the homepage of your site, and adds additions to the anthology. So when you're adding those additions, the first thing you're going to do, we talked about this last time that I spoke about a month ago. First thing you're going to do is make sure your edition has its license element. So here, this is inside of the edition page, ahdm underscore edition.xml, has as always its publication statement with the availability child, and then two license elements, one of which is for the anthology, one of which is for LEMDO. This is the first thing that's needed. Make sure that's in there. Once it's licensed, you're going to go to your anthology.xml file and head all the way to the bottom, where you'll see that there is this. You've got your usual TEI element. It contained a text element, which contained a body element, which contained all of the text for your homepage. But all of that is contained in a TEI corpus. This is saying all of the anthology, one big corpus of texts. What do we want to include in that big corpus? Well, here's what we want to include. So we're going to add this processing instruction, lemdo-import. And you'll see it's got pointy brackets like usual, but it also has these question marks on either side. This is just a processing instruction. In not this color scheme of oxygen, in your typical color schemes of oxygen, your light or your graphite mode, this will be purple. It's just in red on my screen because I've changed the colors a bit. And this is linking, like we've always done links this entire year, to a document using that doc prefix, doc colon, and then whatever the XML ID of the file is. So This processing instruction says, bring in LEMDO import. Here's what I want you to import with this ref. It's a document, and it is the Honest Horror edition page, which in turn includes all of the files that Honest Horror is going to publish. So this brings in everything from that edition that has been included in that edition page. And each edition that you want to include will get one of these processing instructions. So when you are preparing to release, you're going to, again, decide what you want to add to this publication, put those all in the bottom of this file. So again, I'm going to share my Oxygen screen. I'm going to pull up this qme.xml. As I mentioned, everything in this file is wrapped in a TEI corpus, because this is your anthology, the corpus of TEI files that you want to publish. Then it has a TEI header for that TEI corpus. This is where the metadata for your entire anthology happens. So you say, here's who the anthology leads are, here's what the anthology is, here are our general funders for everything. And you give all of that information. You give your, copyright statement for everything, your general copyright statement. And you say, when was this anthology released? That happens in your revision desk. After that TEI header, you also have a TEI element. And this is where we get into things that are a bit more familiar if you've been following along with these webinars. You have your typical TEI header, which goes just for the file itself. And this is for your homepage, your website homepage. This corresponds with the text that's happening here. Queensman Edition is a collaborative site. That's what this second TEI header is for. It has all the same stuff that you expect. And then it has another revision desk, and this says, when was this homepage published? You have your text element, any images and text that you want to include. Your TEI element ends here, and then you have all of these import elements. And you'll notice a few are commented out. That's because they're editions that the anthology leads know they're going to want to include, but weren't ready for the last publication. When it's time for their next publication, they'll uncomment them, and then they'll be ready to include. So that's the basics of the XML page. Are there any questions there? I'm going to keep moving on. So that's your homepage, that's your anthology metadata. You also will need to think about navigation, which happens in your site page.html in that template folder. That's where you set up your top navigation bar, your footer, things like that. So in that template folder, the site page.html file, it's scaffolding out your website. What is happening on there? This is where you add your about pages. This is where you link to them. And this is where you make sure that your styling is actually going to take place. You create your top navigation bar. You create your footer. That's what this file is going to do. And again, let's take a look at an example. So here's the QME, sitepage.html. And right out the bat, it's a bit different because it's HTML, not TEI. HTML, as I said, is just another XML language. It's the one that actually goes on the website or creates that website, builds that website. It's a little bit different from TEI, but fairly straightforward to get a hang of. And the good news is that you don't have to write all of this yourself. We help you out. We give you kind of a template, and then you add the things that you need to add. And ask for help when you need help, of course. But this is where you give the title of your website, the Queensman editions. We have all of our links to style sheets. So we say, please take the LEMDO styling, and then also take the Queensman edition styling if there's also specific Queensman edition styling, which there is because they want to have a red header. So again, this is what the website looks like. This red comes from their CSS. The CSS gets included at the top of the HTML file. We had our fav icons here. These two little things. They add this, which is actually not what it should be. It should be the little logo. So that needs updated, but it adds that little image there. And that's what all of these are actually doing. Then we get to the body, and this is where it gets exciting for Anthology leads, because this is where you decide what happens at the top of the website. Where do I want to direct people? You get your site navigation, nav ID site navigation, and it has a bunch of lists. In HTML, we have two types of lists. We have unordered lists, UL, ordered lists, OL, I think. And then each of those has LI. That's the item in the list. It's a list item, LI. And so these are unordered lists because they're not numbered or anything like that. They're just, items in a list. Here we have the about list, which corresponds with this about button here. It has some JavaScript so that the little arrow on the about button changes direction when you click on it. You don't need to worry about that. It comes when we help give you your template for the HTML. But here's what you will be customizing is this list here, which is where you link to each of your about page files. So here we're linking to QME_about. It's the introduction to the site. The Anthology leads wanted that to show up in the about button, and so they've put it there. Same with all of these things. And each of the options in your navigation bar is going to have this LI, say what you want the text to be, and then the list of what you want under that button. So here's performance editions. Again, if we click here, there's that JavaScript. It made that little arrow turn upright. I can make that bigger. There it is. Nice little flourish. And here's that list that the Anthology leads added of things that they want to show up in performance editions. So that's kind of what's happening in your HTML page. Same thing. If we scroll down, all of this kind of gets replaced during our processing. So then we have, text that shows up. To supporters, let's scroll down. And here we've got our footer. Let me find the top of the footer here. There we go. The footer is where the site footer happens. So everything in here corresponds with what's going on down below. So they've got a link to about, link to copyright, link to privacy, links to each of their funders with images, links to supporters, TEI, LEMDO, the Endings project, a site version number, modification date, so then people know how to cite when was this published, and the revision that this was published at. And all of that's happening down in this footer. So all of that, Anthology leads you decide what you need to add, and you add it in there. But again, that's one part where LEMDO will help you out because the HTML is new for a lot of us. Okay, so that's the encoding. That's what you want to get done before you say, I am ready to release, because those are all the things that need to be done if you want to be published. You need to have a kind of template for your site to go on. You'll want to have your colors in place or any images that you need. All of your about pages need to be written. All of that needs to get done in encoding. Once you've done all of that, you send an email and you say, hey, I think we're getting ready for release. We want to come out, publish in a few months. Let's move into pre-freeze. This is where we do some polishing. And the first thing that we do is we work together to create a pre-freeze checklist. This is where we kind of organize your workflow. LEMDO will give you a template for this. I'll show you a template of it in a second. You're going to add space for all of the files that you're including. And it's going to look something like this. Oh, sorry. There it is. I've been going for spreadsheets lately because they're fairly easy to organize. It's going to have a README page, how to use this thing. So you're not just kind of guessing what you need to do. It tells you color coding, all of the information that's available, and the workflow that you should follow during pre-freeze. We'll tell you who's involved in the release. It will give you a list of site files. It will give you a list of your about pages. If you have more about folders, we typically will add a tab for each of those. But this is where your acknowledgements, everything happens. And typically what's going to happen for all of the files at this point, LEMDO is going to go in, check the encoding. Anthology leads are going to go in and proofread. And for the editions, the editors can do that. Somebody will go in and check spelling. I've put Canadian spelling here, but my understanding some anthologies are using different spellings. We're going to go in, update metadata, and we're going to look at the on-site rendering of your metadata just to make sure there was nothing missed, no copy-paste errors, no errors in giving credit or anything like that. So you'll make one of these together with LEMDO, and then you have a full list of what to do. You will go in and assign who should do everything. Is it the anthology lead? Is it LEMDO? Work together to figure that out. You get to say, is this task in progress? Is it done? Is it not started yet? It feels really good when all of these start to turn green, let me tell you. And then we kind of keep track of, are each of these tabs done? Yes, yes, yes. Let's move on to the next phase. So when we're looking at each of those steps in there, the check encoding things, this is where we're wrapping up any TEI loose ends. LEMDO, as I said, is going to go through your files, make sure that the encoding matches what needs to be done. If there are any lingering encoding issues, let's say, the paragraphs don't have XML IDs yet, we'll make a task and say, well, we need to number the paragraphs in this file. You, the anthology lead, and LEMDO will work together to decide who needs to complete which task. And then somebody will go and do those tasks. So the issues will all get fixed, comments will get resolved. So then your encoding is in tip-top shape, ready to be published. You'll also be proofreading, catching any errors from kind of the more editorial or authorial side. You and or your editors are going to proof the files. This right here, this is your last chance to add anything or make major changes. And I'm going to say this a few times. It's going to be bolded in a few places because this is a really important note to make. Once we're out of this pre-freeze, no more major changes. This is that chance. So make sure you're thinking about that at this point. Metadata is the other big thing that happens during pre-freeze. I love the metadata bit. I find it very methodical, and it is where we give credit where it is due. So LEMDO will give you a metadata template as well. We have a format, some of which, the elements, the stuff like, the general order of it, we have some requirements. You will need to update it so that it matches what your anthology needs. And then LEMDO typically will go in and update the metadata in your files. This is often, again, what I do. I really enjoy it. And then we also check metadata on your pre-release site. That's also usually LEMDO, usually Janelle. However, it can also be done by Anthology leads for sure. And I'll give you a quick, brief look at our metadata template. You'll see we have templates, plural. Each type of file has slightly different metadata. And so we go in and we make sure that you have information on how to deal with each of them. So your anthology pages, this is what you need. Edition pages, this is what you need. This includes publication statement. This is where you can update that copyright stuff so that you make sure it's in all of your files. What do your annotations need? Well, they need to link back to your modernized text. All of this should be done in the pre-freeze period. And once that's done, everything's been checked. You say, okay, I think we're done our pre-freeze. Let's head back into that freeze period. This is where we do those final checks. Are there any questions here? No?
Nothing. Wow, so helpful.
Janelle, your voice kind of clipped away, but I do see a thank you from Heather for the metadata template in the chat. I'm glad you enjoy it. Okay, let's head into freeze then. These are our final checks. So again, put the definition again. This is that period where we say nothing new, no major changes. This is what we want to publish. We've figured all of that out in all of the work we've already done. This is just making sure that everything is going to be as good as it can be. Okay, and I do see a question in the chat from Brett saying, does the freeze apply to everything? What if I want or need to update, say, a detail in the about HTML? A grim example, a member of the editorial board passes away. So with freeze, there is the option for those glaring errors or those, things that are really important to get right. So if somebody passes away, of course, you want to be respectful of that and make that change during this period. I have some examples of what counts as a glaring error and what doesn't. That I would say is a glaring error. If you have somebody in there that is unfortunately no longer with us and are able to make that change, make that change. If you want to add new editorial decisions, that can't happen during freeze. If
It follows up and says, I guess the question is whether the freeze is about freezing the editorial content versus project content. If you'll get to that, we don't need to answer it now.
Yeah, we'll get to that a bit. Loosely both, but we will get to that. So again, during this phase, we're going to make a checklist. I love checklists. I love making sure that everything is done. That's really important before we do a publication. This is our path to the finish line. So we're gonna go ahead and create that checklist. You and LEMDO will split the tasks. And this is what the tasks will be. The big one that tends to take time is link checking. We are linked early modern drama online after all. So we have a lot of links. Hopefully they all go to something, and we find out at this point. And there are two places that you're going to check. The first is in diagnostics. And I'll show you how to get there. This is the path. You go to that LEMDO dev site, resources, diagnostics. So what that looks like for you is you go to your LEMDO dev. In our top nav, we have resources. And you'll see in here we have something called diagnostics. Janelle also showed this to you last time, but I will point this out one more time because we need to go in here and make sure that none of your file XML IDs are in any of these bad link lists. On some browsers, you can Control F or Command F at this point and search for them and find what you need to find. Firefox doesn't let you do that. You do need to open up the list before you can Control F. So we have a bad link here. If I just Control F, URI_EG, nothing comes up. But if I do it now, it does. So I recommend opening anything that has red when you do your searches, because depending on browser, you will be able to find those links or not. But you'll check in here, and if any of your files are in any of these bad links lists, you will update them at the freeze point if you haven't already caught them. They're often caught beforehand. This is the final, let's make sure, last chance.
Navarra, can you do a Control F for, I don't know, HW?
Phrase not found in bad internal links. So no HW in here. We can check in old TLN links. HW. There it is. We have some old links in the collation file and in the annotation file.
Okay. Brett, I'll take care of those.
Okay. So those are our bad internal links. The next thing that we have is external links. And this we've got a longer pathway to get to. I will show you what it looks like. This we check in Jenkins. Martin has very, very helpfully created some XML or sorry, HTML lists of bad external links, or of all of the external links, sorry. To find those, very similar, you're going to go to resources, and then you'll find Jenkins dashboard anthologies. That part's important that you're going to the anthologies one. And this is the page you'll come to. This is our Jenkins page. This is our website builder. In here, you'll find last successful artifacts. You'll go there. You'll go to products. And then you'll go to whatever your anthology is. If we're looking at DRE right now, here we are. You'll see we have these pages, 6 of them, external links _ number.html, along with an index. And if you go to that index, it also just gives you links to those 6 places. It's easy to check them. You will go to this validator right here. This validator will check if there are any bad links on the page. Let me open that in a new tab. Copy your link. Paste it in. Check. And then it'll give us an error right now. Not sure why. But it will check links typically for each of these. If you click on them, it has a list of every single link. You can also go through one by one and click them all, but when you have the validator right there, no need for that. The other thing is once you do find, you've got error 404, you can search for the link inside of your anthology, inside of each of your editions, and if it's in there, you'll go through and you'll correct them. ESTC ones, we will need to figure out, with the ESTC being gone, which I think we've mentioned almost every webinar, because it's very sad. but we do have many links to ESTC. So those will need to change. Any of the links that don't go somewhere, we will update. It won't check that it goes exactly where you want it to go, but it will check that it goes somewhere. And
Can I
hopefully,
jump in?
yeah,
With the ESTC for now, I think the best thing is just to leave them as is because they are planning to remount the site. And if the link changes, we'll be able to change them very quickly through the whole site if they remained exactly as they are. And there's a comment in the chat from James. We appreciate your conscientious thoroughness and your friendly, patient persnicketyness so much, Navarra.
thank you. Okay, so those are all of our link checkers. So that gets done in freeze. Because we do have all of those systems set up to help us check, it doesn't take too long. Let me go back to slideshow. It doesn't take too long, but it is a task that needs to be done. Because what's more frustrating than going to a website and it has a bunch of links and none of them work? Don't want that. After that, we're going to go and check our hamburger menu. Does our hamburger have all of the right ingredients? We'll find out. If you don't know what I mean by hamburger menu, on all of the LEMDO websites, you're going to see every single page this little icon in the top left. It might be a different color depending on your anthology. That happens in that CSS folder we talked about in that SCSS file. But it's going to look like this, 3 horizontal lines in a square. And when people click on that, they get brought to this panel that has content, credits, tools, and about. You just want to make sure that the things that you want to be in there are in there. They typically are, but every now and then we'll catch an error like the contents aren't quite right. Or even though we've checked metadata, somehow it's missing the credit for one of the people. And so this is one of those chances to make those final catches. So you're going to go through and make sure these are in your hamburger menu. In the content section, it will have a table of contents and it will have links. Each of the contents in your table of contents is a link. You see that little underline there? This will take you to the rationale section, vocabulary section. Inside of the credit section, this is where we give credit. One of the places we give credit. There's credit going on all over the place because it's really important. So this is where the editor names get put in, the author names get put in. If the anthology leads are being credited for, in the edition page, that gets put in, or in your about pages, that gets put in. Any of your encoders get put in, copyright holders, LEMDO team. If you've had RAs work on your thing, RAs names get put in there, anthology leads where needed. All of those go into the credits. And you'll just make sure that there's something there. If it's empty, there's a problem. And you're making sure this is not empty. Tools, it depends on which page you're on, whether or not there are tools, but you'll make sure that the appropriate ones are there. So in your modernized text, it has a show annotation, hide annotation, show collation, hide collation. And then the final one is about. This is where we get that link to metadata. Somebody's going to click that metadata link, make sure there's something under each of the headings. There should be at this point for sure. There's a link to the source XML, to the original XML, and the standalone XML. If you're not familiar with those words, that's okay. When we build our website, your TEI gets turned into a few different things. And each of those things, one of them's called source, one of them's called original, one of them's called standalone. The source is the one closest to what you began with. Original is once it's gone through some transformations, and standalone is with everything that it needs. So if your file is separated from the greater anthology site, everything that you need is still there. It has links to each of those so that people can access them. And those should all be there. And this is also where we check for those glaring errors. So this is your last chance for minor corrections before release. So here are some things that you're looking for. If you notice a missing space, missing punctuation, extra punctuation, spelling errors, this is that last chance to fix them. If you notice that, again, there's somebody in there who has passed away and that needs to be kind of acknowledged in some way, or somebody's missing from being given credit, that needs to get put in. Things that are not glaring errors, adding a new file, that's an addition. If your editor realizes, oh shoot, I really want to collate an extra edition, that can't happen at this point. That's a next release. If you need to add a big section to about pages, new editorial ideas and practices, those can't be put in at the freeze level because, they're going to have to go through all of those same, checks that we already did. It will need to have somebody check the encoding. It will need to have somebody proofread it. It will need to have somebody check the links in it. It will need to have somebody update metadata. All of those things, if they need to happen from your change, it's not quite the right time for it anymore. But it can be included in a next release. If you have something where you're not sure, you think it's probably really important to include, but you're not sure if it's appropriate to include at this point, ask. Ask Janelle, ask me, and we'll figure out when it's the right time to make whatever that change is. But okay, and I see a comment from Brett. Okay, so the analogy with print applies here too. Once a release has been published, it is static. Yeah. So once it's been published, nothing can happen to it. It's static, it's there, it exists as that edition until you go through and you do the entire process again and you publish another edition, and then that's static. Same as if you publish a book. At this freeze point, however, we're saying, for the most part, editors, anthology leads, you've done your job. We just need to make sure everything is, we want to make sure that there's nothing that would kind of detract from it as a scholarly publication. And so that's what's going on here. The other thing that happens during freeze is the status update. So this is the last thing. You mark your files as published. So this part is done by the LEMDO team. And it permanently notes in your file when your file was first released. If it goes through major revisions, gets published again, that can be given another date, but this will say, when was this file released? And then that makes it so that people can cite this file, when was it published? And this is what that looks like. So it happens in your revision description, your revision desk, where all of your change statements are. This is one imagining that there's no encoding that happens here. This is what goes into the revision desk. You'll have a change that says, I created this file, and it will have a status, likely something like TEI_INP. It's a TEI file, it's in progress. If it started life as an IML file, it will say IML-TEI_INP because it began life as IML, changed to TEI, it's in progress. Once all of that's been encoded, somebody will come in and proof. You'll have TEI_proofing as the status. Once the proofing has been completed, you'll have TEI_proofed to say the proofing is done. If the file goes under peer review, it will have a change element saying that it's been peer reviewed with that status peer reviewed. File was peer reviewed by an external peer reviewer who will depend on whether or not that peer reviewer is being publicly acknowledged and named. But if they are not, it's just LEMD1 or the Anthology, I believe sometimes will have their XML ID in there. And then finally, we'll have this change element here at the top with the date of publication. This is the date that the anthology is released. It will always be org LEMD1. LEMDO is who publishes it, therefore LEMDO is who gets that change element. And it will have a status of published, which will match your revision disk status as published. And it will say published file, and when that's done, your file is ready to be published. Here we go. Release into the wild, sending those files out into the web. So the last steps are LEMDO. Janelle says to the LEMDO developer, hey, this anthology, it's gone through all of the stuff it needs to go through. Let's publish it. And the LEMDO developer says, yes, I agree. And then goes ahead and releases a static copy of the site. And then your site is published. It's static. No changes will happen to it on the public-facing website. On the development site, of course, everything that your editors will do will continue being updated, but the public site will be there and it won't change until you do all of this again. Okay, quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So that static site will never change, and it is at the kind of canonical URL of your project. When you do another release, your previous release or releases are still saved, and they have their own canonical URL that has the release number built into it. So we never take things off the digital shelf, even when we do the next release.
Yeah. Thank you, Janelle.
And there's a question from Brett. What is the frequency of releases? Who determines that? It's the anthology leads themselves. So once an anthology has been released, generally, once there is a significant body of content, a complete new edition, or if an edition is being released in phases, then whenever a new phase has been peer reviewed, we can re-release the anthology with the new material. We don't do releases in order to correct errors in a static site. They can get corrected in the next release of material, and the release notes will indicate that there's been a minor change in some other edition along with the release of a new edition. So it's very easy to release. Like, the actual time it takes for Martin to release a site is very, very small. It took us 3 years to build the system, but now that it's built, it takes us 15 minutes to release the site. So that's not the problem. The problem is all the work that has to go into the pre-freeze and freeze period. So we don't like to do it unless there's a partial new edition or a new edition to be released.
And again, I will note that the first release of your anthology is for sure the biggest. That takes a lot of work with these about pages, fixing any of that styling, anything like that. Subsequent releases are a little bit less intense because they are, adding an addition or adding just a smaller piece or a few smaller pieces. So the first one is definitely the biggest workload almost. Okay. I'm going to move into our recap because we just went through an awful lot of things. But the first thing we did was we said, what are the phases of release? We're following a predictable cycle of encoding, pre-freeze, freeze, release. And then once you've released, you'll go back to that encoding. So if you have a new edition, that gets encoded. Then when that's all done, you move back through the phases. During your encoding, things are added and encoded. Anthology about pages are completed. Your editions are completed. Your anthology bibliography, everything that you've cited everywhere in your anthology, that's all compiled in one place. Your editions are added to the anthology, so you've decided what editions are going to be added each time, and then your HTML template is all scaffolded out. Once that's done, you head into that pre-freeze, you complete that checklist, which says that LEMDO checks your encoding, encoding issues are fixed, your files are proofed, your metadata is updated and checked. Once that's done, you move into freeze. And as I said, I'm gonna say this a few times, it's gonna be bolded. You're not adding new files. You're not making major revisions. You will check your links in internal in diagnostics, external in that Jenkins link checker list, and the W3 link checker. Hamburger menus, you're going to make sure that the contents are there. If there are glaring errors, you can fix them. And then LEMDO changes your status to published. And then we release. Martin gives the okay. Your anthology is published. For resources, we have an entire chapter about this, and it also gives some of the things that Janelle talked about last time. So check out these pages, all about anthology releases. And I'll give acknowledgements. Um, Thank you, as always, to the Canadian Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for funding this webinar series. It has been really good to do and hopefully useful for everybody, all of the editors and anthology leads. Thanks to myself for slide design. Thank you to Martin and Janelle for our TEI customization and to the UVic Humanities Computing and Media Center for our site design and hosting. And thank you to all of you for coming to our webinars, watching on our YouTube, and engaging with all of this learning.